Hey you guys, I wanted to do a brief video on the final project for this class, the major paper, the Strategic Leadership Analysis Project. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through the main points on the course outline and kind of explain them a little bit and kind of go over the criteria for evaluation, and hopefully this will help you as you're thinking about the paper, as you're writing the paper, and so you can do a great job on it. All right, so I hope this helps and follow along. So, the description of the paper, let's start with that, shall we? Excuse me here, well, I can make this visible. Oops, no, it's not visible now, is it? Okay, here we go. All right, we're talking about the Strategic Leadership Analysis Project. I'm just going to talk about option A. This option focuses on organizational culture, and hopefully by now in this class and through your reading you feel like you've been marinating in this topic and you understand what it is, you understand what organizational culture is, you know what the key components are, you're familiar with Edgar Schein's model, with Chan's work on that as it relates to church. So really the first step, if you haven't, well, at this point you should have already done your reading on that. Otherwise your paper needs to reflect your informed opinions about this, right? So having a good working knowledge of those concepts is critical. So I'd probably start by reviewing Schein's model of Chan's material, maybe outlining what some of the key points are, so that you can speak about these things intelligently. Okay, so your paper should include, follow along at home, your paper should include, 1, a description of the stages of development, beginning, midlife, etc., of the organization. 2, a description and analysis of the organizational culture of your church, utilizing the specific language of the authors. And again, just pause right here. This is where your knowledge of the textbooks is really going to be handy. So when you're describing the culture, and when you're analyzing the culture, you need to use some of these terms and concepts. So for example, Edgar Schein talks about three levels or 3 layers of analysis. He talks about sort of the assumptions, sort of those hidden things that we all believe are true but nobody really talks about. He talks about the values and the beliefs, and then he talks about the visible artifacts, behavior, dress, rituals, those sorts of things. So you need to be able to break each of those things down and talk about culture on those different levels and describe what those things mean. So if you don't know by now, it's important to me that you reflect knowledge of key concepts, right? So you need to describe. So when we talk about assumptions, what exactly is that, right? I kind of gave you a quick and dirty description, but you need to be able to articulate that and cite that from Schein's book, so that the reader, in this case me, but whoever else reads it, knows that, oh, okay, you really know your stuff. You really know what the organizational literature says about culture. Okay, so you're going to describe and analyze the culture of your organization or church, and an analysis of leadership's role, especially the founder, in forming culture of your organization. Analysis of what type of leadership is necessary for the stage of development in the organizational culture, and specific steps you will take as a leader to form and create organizational culture in your part of the organization. All right, so here's sort of an outline. You could simply use those points I mentioned above to outline your paper. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sections there, right? So you're gonna have an introduction. This should be a paragraph or 2, and this should include what your paper is about. And it surprises me how many people launch in an introduction and they just kind of go into the history of their church or whatever. They don't really introduce the paper. Okay, so an introduction is an introduction to the paper, right? What are you writing about? What are you hoping to achieve in this paper? And it's not a bad idea to, draft an introduction to kind of keep you focused, but then when you're done, double back to that introduction and say, does this introduction cover all the areas that I actually ended up talking about in my paper? Right? So your introduction should introduce the paper with a nice pithy thesis statement. All right? So what's a thesis statement? It's a simple sentence that describes in a nutshell what your paper is about. Right? In this paper, I will discuss some of the key elements of organizational culture and an analysis of my church, along with recommendations for cultural improvement or cultural change, whatever you want to do. Boom, that's it. There's your thesis statement. It covers all the bases. And somebody could just read that one statement there and know pretty much what your paper's about, right? Not a lot of details in there, but at least they know what the paper's about. Okay, so you got your introduction with the thesis, a brief history of organization of church. Now, emphasis on brief. Again, you guys could probably write pages and pages on just this part right here, right? But we don't want that, right? We just want like maybe a page, okay? So please keep it pithy, keep it succinct, keep it parsimonious, all right? These are all graduate level words, which all mean short, okay? So keep your history and organization brief, and focus in on salient topics, salient issues related to culture, right? So maybe you talk about the founder and his or her style. You know, maybe talk about some key events that really shaped the culture. So maybe your church came out of a church split or something like that. Or maybe your church is part of a larger movement, right? That would really help the reader to understand where, you know, some of the cultural background issues. A description of the stages of development of organizational culture. Right? So this is a little trickier, but I want you to really think about where this organization is. So for example, if it's brand new, say you're part of an entrepreneurial kind of startup thing, that's going to have a different kind of culture. That's going to have a lot more energy and vision. It's probably going to be a lot more chaotic, right? A lot less structure, informal, as opposed to a much more mature organization. Say a church that's been around for 50 years. That's going to have a much more stable, kind of a bureaucratic feel. Everybody knows how things should be done. Everybody knows who does what, right? And then you might be somewhere in between there. So talk about the stage of development and how that is kind of a, how that reflects the culture, right? Depending on where that is, sort of startup, chaotic, energetic, mature, stodgy. Maybe it needs some, you know, some renewal, some reinvigoration. Okay, next point, analysis of the leadership's role, especially the founder, in forming a culture of your organization. All right, so the book talks about this, and I know that I talked about this in our class as well, but the founder of any organization, whether it's a church or business, really leaves a huge impact and an imprint upon the culture of that organization. Typically their values, their manner, their approach to going about things, really, you know, dictates to a large degree what that church or organization is going to look like. So I think about Hope Chapel, right? That was the church that I went to when I was first a young Christian and just kind of coming up in ministry. Ralph Moore was the founder of that church, and he was kind of a easygoing, kind of low-key kind of guy. He would preach in Hawaiian shirts and sandals, you know, and subsequently, you know, the church kind of had this laid-back, easygoing, you know, Hawaiian shirt and sandals kind of feel. You know, it was a beach church. It was located in Hermosa Beach. And so all the leaders looked like that. People showed up to church very informally, very casually. You know, people didn't refer to each other, you know, pastor and pastor. It was just, hey, Ralph, and hey, John, or whoever was a leader, you know, at that point. So the founder, right, in a large degree kind of sets the tone and the mindset of that organization, if you will. So talk about the founder's role. And other leaders too, key leaders, and in terms of how they really helped to establish that culture. And again, I want you using some of these terms that we talked about in that the book talks about. Excuse me. So, for example, you know, oftentimes leaders develop rituals, right? Certain things that they do a lot. They have certain mantras, things they say a lot. They model things, right? Things they do a lot. So what are some of the things that the founder, the key founders really made sure was part of the DNA of the church or organization, and link that to some of the concepts that we're studying in terms of the literature, right? So talk about ritual, right? Talk about myth. You know, sometimes organizations, especially churches, have these myths and this mythology of how things started. And as an insider, we've come to accept these things as true, but as an outsider, you might say, well, that's kind of a bit of a myth there. It doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that the story has taken on a larger than life role within the organization, right? This is a story that helps explain why we do things and why certain things are important. Okay, an analysis of what type of leadership is necessary for the stage of development, the culture, the organizational culture is in. so as to foster flourishing. All right, so for example, let's say you're a very mature organization, been around 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, whatever. What kind of leadership is really going to take to kind of foster that next stage of growth? Do you need somebody who can kind of reinvigorate, who can kind of recapture that original vision, kind of go back to the foundings? Do you need somebody who can kind of create a new vision, which sort of incorporates the heart and the DNA of the founder, yet sort of has a new perspective and spin, right? I kind of think of the King's University in that sort of that model I just described there. Great roots with Pastor Jack and in Van Nuys, and now with the whole transition to Southlake and the connection with the Gateway Church, it's a bit of a transition, right? And so these are some of the things that leadership here really is talking about and wrestling with. How do we kind of keep the legacy and history of the past alive, yet do new things that everybody would want for us to do. The next one is specific, concrete, time-oriented intervention steps you will take as a leader to form and create organizational culture in your sphere of influence. Now, you might be the senior leader, and you can do a lot of things, right? You can start new rituals, you can start new stories, you can tell new myths, you can come up with new values, right? You can challenge the assumptions, and you can do that church-wide, organization-wide. You might just have one little niche, one little corner of the ministry, right? And you can only do so much. Well, talk about things that you can do, right? So maybe you could break this up and say, hey, if I was in charge, here's some of the things I could do. But since I'm not, here's the things that I can do and that I will do. And again, give some real specificity. So, if for example, say you're in a chaotic state and you want the organization to be a little more formal and concrete and kind of get stuff done, talk about modeling those sorts of things. Okay, I'm going to model good organizational behavior. I'm going to model predictability. I'm going to model structure and planning and those kinds of things, right? Because that's important where we're at. We're kind of moving beyond that, baby steps. Now we have to kind of get things together, and then a conclusion. All right. So again, kind of go back, read what you just talked about. Summarize it all, talk about, a good conclusion should almost be like a good introduction. You could read that and really get the gist of the paper, but you might also have some kind of, parting shots, some hopes and dreams for the future, those sorts of things. So anyhow, that's what should be in your paper. Now, let me quickly go over some points of evaluation here. All right, here we go. Demonstration of good working knowledge of the various concepts used in class. That's 30% of your paper, right? So don't skimp on this. 30% of your grade, I mean. Don't skimp on that. Don't give me 2 citations and give me a quote from Wikipedia or something and expect that you're going to get a good score on that, right? I want you to show me repeatedly over and over with graduate level knowledge and depth that you really understand what organizational culture is about. All right, this is important to me. It really is, and I'm going to lean in a little bit. This is important. It's a big part of your paper, right? So you need to write paragraphs. You need to write voluminously, and you need to cite with you need to make lots of cites. All right, I was looking for a good word there. It kind of eluded me. Thoughtful personal reflections which demonstrate thoughtful personal reflections demonstrate appropriate spiritual humility and understanding areas of personal growth. Now, this paper it's more about an organization as opposed to personal growth per se. Maybe talk about organizational growth, right? So certain humility, how you think that organization is going to grow. Thoughtful and workable plans and recommendations for personal growth. Again, this is probably more organizational growth. We talked about that. That should be a major section of your paper. The organization, mechanics, grammar, bibliography, etc. All right, so please review your papers, review it twice, maybe have somebody else review it for you. Surprised how many papers, even at the grad level, show up with bad spelling, bad grammar, and those sorts of things. All right, so double check those things, okay? You can lose points for being a little sloppy there. And then follow the TKU writing style guidelines. Now, again, we've talked about this. You can use the Chicago style guidelines, right? They're pretty similar, so I'm not that picky. So you can either use the TKU manual, go online, find some resources on the OWL. Find some resources on the Chicago style, also known as the Turabian style. So I hope this was helpful. I know I kind of went fast because I had to keep them within 15 minutes. I'm trying some new software here, and it only gives you a 15-minute to do your lectures. So without any further ado or any further ado, I just made that term up. Bless you guys. Let me know if you have any questions about the paper. Be glad to help out. All right. So Marco out.